All right, everybody. Well, this is an awesome virtual presentation from some of us down here in San Diego to Dr. Lonhart up in Santa Cruz. Everybody else in Ventura County. This is a wonder of modern technology. So, again, I'm very proud to introduce my very longtime friend, Dr. Steve Lonhart, who currently works for a thing called Simon, which he'll tell us about at the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, a major MPA, as we've been discussing MPAs. Steve, I would not have survived my early grad school days if it wasn't for Dr. Lonhart. I can tell you stories not recorded on Zoom, but Steve did his undergrad at UCLA,
Yeah.
proposed to his wife in the sculpture garden there.
Yeah.
Uh, then did a master's at Long Beach, but
Yep.
his field work was out at Catalina, where I both worked as an undergrad and then went for my PhD. And so how it worked back in the day is they offered us we had a couple different mechanisms to make grad school affordable. Steve, who is at the time in the CSU system rented an apartment out at the Marine Station, and so any of the Cal State grad students could go and stay in it, so it kept costs down. I was not at the Cal State. I was at a UC, but we had a similar program where we could volunteer and do a Saturday public outreach event for the public, and they would cut us some slack. And so Steve worked out there again for his master's degree, and then he shifted to UC Santa Cruz, where he did his PhD, and then afterwards he stayed up in the Santa Cruz area and started working on what would eventually become his current job. And for while Steve has worked on all kinds of cool stuff, for his PhD, he worked on Kellett's whelk. Does anybody know
Yep.
what Kellett's whelks are? Is anybody that familiar? Anybody? Well, maybe we can have Dr. Lonhart explain to us. A very interesting critter whose distribution is changing in the wake of our changing seas. And Steve was looking at how it's this snail, this subtidal snail population dynamics, how it was changing, how it was expanding, all that kind of good stuff. And now, with his current position, he gets to do not only be awesome and he's a fantastic natural historian. He's been those of you that attended WSN, he's one of our he's a previous naturalist of the year. A fantastic premier natural historian that has a great understanding of critters, of physical systems, of how systems interact, all that kind of stuff. And he's employed that in various shapes and forms at his current job, but then also supporting other efforts, monitoring efforts up and down the California coast when we have a disaster, such as as those of us that went on the trip. We've talked a lot about the PCH landslides and the closures. One of those fantastic talks he would have given, I guess we get to hear about that today. But he was one of the key people that jumped into the fray very early on in the wake of a disaster, in this case of a landslide, and just before the landslide, and they monitored the conditions. And so a great example of how you all, even if you don't have a grant, even if you don't have a specific charge in your particular job, with the arming of all the fantastic skills that you've learned now, and you might be learning it when you guys graduate, you can apply those. You don't need to wait. And so this is a great case of jumping in and trying to understand our natural world as it's under assault and under experiencing change. And so with that long intro, it's my pleasure to introduce my longtime friend, Dr. Steve Lonhart. Is going to tell us all about some of the current stuff he's been working on and tell us about the sanctuary and all kinds of manners of great stuff. So Steve, without further ado.
Thank you so much, Sean. That's a wonderful introduction. Um, and what I'm going to do for folks today or tonight is cover three things. The first one's just going to be kind of a little bit of background about the sanctuary, a little bit about my job, a little bit about the place I work in, and then and then some of the resources we have that you guys might find really useful that are free, which is always nice, especially as a college student. And then I'm going to transition and talk a bit about Black Abalone and Big Sur. It used to be that you guys could do this beautiful drive along Highway 1 north to south or south to north. And the highway's been closed for almost 3 years now, which is the longest stretch it's been closed since Highway 1 opened. And so it's supposed to be opening relatively soon, but I'll talk a little bit about one of the stories associated with the closure. And then I'm going to totally switch gears from the intertidal and then switch over to the subtidal and talk about sea urchins and kelp and people that had a change in fishing regulations for 3 years, and some of the things that we found out and are still finding out related to that sort of citizen effort to do something about the loss of kelp and trying to get it to come back. So I'll go through those 3 things, and then I'll have plenty of time for questions. If, as I'm talking, you have a question, all I can see right now is like my stuff, and I'm really scared to touch anything and suddenly make it disappear. So just go ahead on audio, say, hey, Steve, just interrupt me and say, hey, I have a burning question. Can you explain that figure or whatever it is? And we'll do it then. So just feel free to pipe in whenever you want. I will have a pause between each of the 3 or the 2 of the sessions, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. But if there's something that you don't get as I'm going along, feel free to interrupt me, okay? All right, so hopefully, right, so next slide is, so some of you hopefully have heard of either the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary. You almost certainly heard of the Channel Islands National Park Service. They're both on land and underwater. The National Marine Sanctuaries are all from like high tide line down, in some cases, really, really, really deep. And we have marine sanctuaries and sanctuaries in freshwater throughout the United States and in the US territories. And so this is the latest and greatest map that shows where our sanctuaries, the current sanctuaries, are located. And there's kind of 9 on the western side of the US and 9 on the eastern side and in the Great Lakes. And they're all different kinds of sizes, shapes. They have different emphasis. Some of them, like in Wisconsin, they're about shipwrecks. Thunder Bay is also mostly about shipwrecks. The Monitor Sanctuary originally was about literally 1 shipwreck. It was around the Monitor, which was a Civil War vessel that sank, and it was this teeny tiny little sanctuary. They've since expanded it to include habitat, but the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, which is along the central coast of California, and here I'll show you a little map. Oh, if you want to learn more and kind of see the official NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's website, it's right there on the screen at Monterey Bay, all one word, .noaa.gov. So if you want to go there, that has a completely redone website. It's very under 30-year-old oriented. So it means I hate the website because I like old websites that have structure and architecture and links and have like lots and lots of PDFs and data and things on it. This is all like scrolling, moving, like eye candy. So for old people, horrible. For young people, they love it. So go check out the montereybay.noaa.gov website. Now,
you guys have your finger on the pulse of the youth, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Yes, of
exactly.
Course, of course.
So Sean mentioned earlier that I work for a program within the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, which is called SIMON, the Sanctuary Integrated Monitoring Network. And SIMON was an attempt way back in 2003 to kind of make use of this cool thing called the web. There's this new thing out. It's the web, and we can get information on the web. Well, we're like old now because everyone's like, oh yeah, I got that on my phone. That's on my iPad. That's in the cloud. But back, 2 years ago, this web stuff like www dot something was really a big deal. And if you had a website, you could like get an award for website. Now, like a 4-year-old's like, oh, I want to do this for kindergarten and make my own website about eating paste. So anyways, we have a website. I'll get to it in just a second. But basically what we wanted to do is talk about the sanctuary, our Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. And you can see on this map, it goes from just north of San Francisco all the way down to Cambria and San Luis Obispo. And we added the first described underwater seamount, which is Davidson Seamount. It's a huge, massive, extinct underwater volcano, and that's way down on the sort of plains of the seafloor, but it comes up several thousand meters, and it has a tremendous amount of life on it, all kinds of recently discovered and still undiscovered things on it, one of which you may have heard in the recent years. If you've ever heard of the Octopus's Garden, not the Beatles song, but the thing that's kind of like named after the Beatles song, but the Octopus's Garden, that's where these females come, they lay their eggs and they brood them for upwards of 2 years and then die, and then the little babies hatch out. And they didn't know that this even existed here until about 10 years ago. So like, and there are like hundreds of them all over the place near these hydrothermal little seeps where the water gets like 3 degrees above freezing, but that's like hot.
You guys won't remember, but the first lecture I showed a picture of that, but you probably won't remember it.
Yes. So anyways, we have a tremendous amount of almost 300 miles of shoreline. We have sandy beaches, rocky shore, amazing tide pools, cliffs, estuaries, marshes, all kinds of like meeting of land and the sea. And then as you move offshore, we've got continental shelf, slope. We have the Monterey Bay Canyon, which is this massive canyon, which is why the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute and David Packard, when he decided to have an incredible mishmash of computer scientists, technical engineers, and deep sea marine biologists all work together to make cool new toys to explore the deep sea. They built that right at the mouth of the canyon in Moss Landing, and that goes right from the middle of Monterey Bay and goes down thousands and thousands of feet. And so we have lots of marine mammals. It's like if you want to go anywhere in the world to see the biggest diversity of marine mammals, likely within a day or two of cruising around on a boat, you come to Central California. And so anyways, it's an incredibly diverse area. A lot of the diversity we're still describing, we're still characterizing, but some of it's very familiar. And the stuff that is really familiar, whether you've got an Android or an iPhone, whatever platform you use, the Apple platform or the non-Apple platform, you can go ahead and go on and download Sea Photo, all one word. It's free, and you can see that it's got over 500 species on it. There's birds, there's mammals, there's mollusks, barnacles, so invertebrates, algae, even some plants that occur in the intertidal. And you can check that out, and it gives you pictures of them, tells you a little bit about them, and also usually tells you a little bit about how to differentiate one from the other. And if you go to our Simon website, which is sanctuarysimon.org, so this is kind of like this is how we get everything done. Like the first website I showed you was a .gov. That's like what we have to do. But to get around all that kind of hoop jumping and stuff, Sanctuary Simon was developed, and that's in partnership with academic institutions, with NGOs, and a couple of foundations. And that's how we're able to really quickly put stuff up and show the world kind of like what we're doing, who's doing work in Central California, why they're doing it, and all the really cool discoveries they make. So we have a couple of different areas within that website. There's the project database, kind of tells you who's doing what where. The thing that everybody uses by far the most, because they're free, is our photo library. We have over almost 6,000 images in there. And We also have a species database, which is like an online field guide book that's got over 200 species fully like described, photographs, where to find them, how they compare to other species. And a lot of that stuff is the same thing that's in that Sea Photo app. And then the new thing that's being developed is this ecosystem tracking, which is like kind of the thing we've been chasing since back in 2003, which was, hey, can't we go to this cool thing called the web and find out how the sanctuary is doing? And everyone thought, yeah, let's post our information up there. Well, everyone's realized it's a lot harder than just saying that, because you have to build databases, you have to manage databases, you have to generate visually appealing and easy to understand data products. Then you have to serve up those products, and then you have to keep updating as new data come in. And then ideally, that information that's displayed on the web is something that a manager or a researcher like myself could use in either real time or near real time to actually make decisions about things and kind of get informed about what's happening now, as opposed to the current system, which is, let's get a whole bunch of people together over 2 or 3 years, write up a bunch of essays about things, make a bunch of graphs with the data that exists 2 or 3 years ago, and then publish a phone book that we call our condition report. And then take 2 years to have it edited and then reviewed and published, so that by the time it actually hits someone's desk, the information's 2 or 3 years old and it's all in a paper. Or back in the days, thought we were pretty cool. We burned them onto CDs. So nowadays it just goes up on the web, but that's a very slow, cumbersome process that doesn't make the information readily available. And so this ecosystem tracking section is under development and is using WordPress and a lot of things I don't even really understand, little shiny ass things that, it's like my kids go, oh yeah, we use that in high school and middle school. I'm like, I don't know what that is, but they're cool ways of visualizing data and showing them and sharing them. And it's a way for the next wave of scientists to interact with data sets, to generate something that's interesting, and then to push it out to the public and get people to understand what's going on, why it's going on, and if there's something that they can and should be doing about it. So, anyways,
And to be clear, that's not a Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary problem. That's a problem with all of our public agencies. So
amen.
this is not a problem of this one unit. This is a phenomenon of sort of our governmental bureaucratic systems.
100%, 100%. So, anyways, slow changes, incremental. They're happening. There's some cool things. I would encourage you to check them out. Sean has a copy, has a PDF that has all this stuff on it. So if you're not catching it right now, doing screen grabs or whatever it is you're doing, and he has a recording. He's making a recording, so you can check it out.
And
But
I shared it with them. So they have it. So they have it now. They can look afterwards too.
perfect, perfect. So you guys can see this stuff. And if at any point you have questions or want to follow up on something, you find a broken link or something, feel free to contact me. That's part of my job, is to make sure we are responsive to people, and hopefully, and you may have ideas on like stuff. Hey, you should add this species, or hey, I found out this thing that you're saying is actually wrong because it's been updated because they did the genetics and now it's something else. So we're constantly trying to change and update and be sort of hip with the scientific times. Okay, so that's the first segment. Are there any? I'll pause there. Are there any quick questions about that? I mean, I didn't really talk about like my job per se, but I'd be happy to talk about that later on. But I want to kind of get through the kind of data oriented things first. But does anyone have a question right now? It's okay. You
Uh,
can save them up to later. That's fine too.
have you received feedback of how the new format has been received? As in, have people mentioned that receiving the website is better?
Yes, yes. So The website revision has been driven by people back in our headquarters, which is in Washington, D.C. Actually, it's in Silver Spring, Maryland. That's where the NOAA headquarters are. And they had a whole team of people. And it was funny because when they came out, I was like, oh my God, all these people are like my kids' age. They're all mid 20-year-olds. They all had, sort of computer science and social media and kind of social connected kind of backgrounds. And they worked really hard and they looked at a lot of things like, hey, let's look at ESPN. Let's look at other places that have eye-grabbing content that engages the viewer. It gives them tidbits of information. And the idea here is sanctuaries really want to try to kind of broaden people's horizons and understand, hey, there are these things called sanctuaries. They're federal marine protected and freshwater areas. They do have regulations, but they're also areas where you can learn a lot about the resources that are there and how we continue to use many of those resources, but ideally in a sustainable way. So they've been getting really positive feedback from folks because it's been much more engaging than kind of old, what you used to do. You kind of went on a website and it was like layer after layer after layer. And after about 5 clicks, you're like, where am I? I don't even know where I am anymore. Am I still on the same website? And you're like 50 layers into it. And so we found that even though a guy like me loves that, I can just burrow into the layers like a mouse or a hamster, going underneath newspaper. But for a 25-year-old, that's not their jam. So they've been trying to really engage more people and younger people. And the reason I keep targeting on younger people is they're not only targeting younger people, but people who don't necessarily have access to sanctuaries, to the coast, to oceans. They don't have either the economics to support that or the family structure to support that or the opportunity to do that. And they want to make it really engaging for people to get a virtual experience and see something and connect, even though they may not ever get to that place personally, but they make a connection because they see the beauty, they see the incredible, amazing things that happen. So yeah, there's been a lot of very positive feedback from the targeted audience. Good
Cool.
question. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna keep moving, keep holding on your questions, and we can save them to the end and keep going. All right, so the next phase is to talk about a couple of different really dramatic, impactful processes that have been impacting the West Coast and California in particular in the last 5 to 10 years. So the first one I'm going to talk about are the rivers in the sky, atmospheric rivers. And this is something that all of you are probably quite familiar with because they've been in the headlines like every winter for sort of the last 3 or 4 years, pretty much nonstop. Everyone's been waiting for the next atmospheric river to come because when we are hit by an atmospheric river, there's a tremendous amount of rainfall that happens in a very short period of time. And it often includes much of the rainfall that an area will get for the entire year. So it's unlike what we used to do, which was kind of, you kind of have a dry summer and then it kind of eases in the fall. And then you have a series of small little storms and the rain gets metered out kind of over the next 4 or 5 months from kind of the end of October until it kind of stops in sort of April, May. And then we go back into our kind of Mediterranean dry climate. Well, now it's like no rain and then it rains and it rains like insanely for 36 hours. And one of the events that actually happened was in the start of 2020, a couple of not too long ago, we had upwards of 15 inches of rain fell in a 36-hour period along the Big Sur coastline, which is a huge amount. I mean, sometimes we don't even get 20 inches of rain for the whole year. So getting almost 3/4 of your rain in 2 days is crazy. And so when we get hit with these atmospheric rivers, If the terrain that the rain is falling on is intact and vegetated, for the most part, it'll do okay. You'll still get landslides and in some cases, slips, and you can get mud flows. But when it's a vegetated intact slope, even if it's really steep, a lot of times the system does okay. When it doesn't do okay is when you have the other thing that's been, you guys have, if you live in California or grew up in California, have been experiencing is wildfires. And so in this particular case, I'm going to talk about the Dolan Fire, which happened in Big Sur, was one of the larger wild, kind of forest wildfires that happened. And the little map here shows kind of the outline, and it went right up to the coast. So it burned from the coast way inland, and it's a beautiful area. I mean, that's all backpacking and hiking areas there. It's all part of the Ventana Wilderness, which is in Los Padres National Forest. So this is really undeveloped, minimally logged, really cool habitat. In part, it's not developed because it's really steep in a lot of places, especially on the coastline, but it is just a dramatic area. I spent my childhood camping and backpacking in there. I still do it to this day. Beautiful area. But when you have a fire that comes through that burns with such intensity and had such a huge backlog of unburnt material, you had this massive, very intense, very strong fire that burned right down into the soil. And what that does is it basically makes the soil extremely vulnerable for 2 to 3 years to rainfall. And if you have intense rainfall during that period, you have no chance for vegetation to kind of regrow and restabilize it. And that material, all that burned stuff and all the soil in really steep areas can just wash down and generate what are called debris flows. And here's a photo of one of the Highway 1 closures. This one they opened up after a couple of months, but this is like one of those little seasonal creeks that normally doesn't really have much going on, but there was fire, not there, right where you're looking at, but kind of further up the watershed. And what you're looking at, it looks like, oh, there's a lot of leaves and little sticks. Those are full-size tree trunks, right? You can see the little cars, and there's like those things that look like little sticks. Those are redwood trees. And they came down like toothpicks, and they blew out. So there was like a culvert, like a big metal pipe, one of those, corrugated pipes that you could crawl through as a kid. And it was underneath the road, and it just completely got overwhelmed. It backed up, and then the water blew out the road and took out the cliff. And then looking down at the water, you can see it's just milk chocolate. And it was milk chocolate for weeks and weeks and weeks. The ocean, everyone, oh, the ocean's got so much water. Well, coastally, that heavy sediment laden water persists for weeks to months, and it causes lots of problems. So some of the problems are what I'm about to show you. So I was fortunate enough to work with a graduate student. So there was a graduate student named Wendy Bragg. She was a PhD student up at UC Santa Cruz. And
She spoke at WSN. She talked to WSN.
Yes, she did talk at WSN. And so she she was doing her work on this sort of interaction between debris flows and black abalone, the fire cycle, all this stuff, all the things I just kind of talked about. That was kind of like her focus. And she was actually part of a team of people who went out before there were some debris flows and collected some data at some sites that they said, well, we don't know if there's going to be a debris flow here, but there could be because there's been some fire further up the watershed. And so they said, there's a high likelihood that something bad could happen. Well, yeah, something bad did happen in terms of bad to the intertidal. So what I'm showing you, in late January of 2021, the Dolan Fire was considered contained December 31st of 2020, so right at New Year's Eve. 3 weeks later, in 2021, in January, that's when the atmospheric river hit 15 inches of rain in 36 hours. That all landed on the Dolan Fire scar. Any watershed that was burned out became a torrent of mud. Now, we're not talking about like just water flowing. This is like cement flowing, and cement flowing super fast. It even damaged some of the bridges on Highway 1. Upwards of 15 feet up the pilings of the bridges, cement, concrete was chipped out because logs were flying down, boulders the size of cars. Things were coming down at a really fast rate, and there was tons of it. So what I'm showing you right now is two views of the same big rock. So like you can see there's this rock kind of in the middle top of the shot on the upper shot. And then I'm standing kind of now looking out towards sea at that same rock. And you can see it's got a very, very big square face. This already has material just in the 2 weeks since the rainfall and the debris flows. This is abnormal already. And you may not be able to tell, but like the algae that's sticking up out of the water looks like someone attacked it with a weed whacker. Like those should be nice blades, and it should be like nice blue water, and there should be a little bit of sand. So this is not like pristine. This is already, showing signs of damage. Now I'm going to show you the upper scene a month later, and basically where all that water was. This is not a tidal thing. This is like at the same tidal height. The beach and the slope filled in. So all this material that came down, when it came out of the watershed, it didn't stop there. It started moving down the coast. And then you look at another shot here. Now you can see where there'd been all these rocks. They've been buried under tons and tons of dirt and rock that's now basically sand. And so it was like heartbreaking to go out there, because you'd see the stuff and you knew it was going to keep marching, and it was this slow, inexorable march, killing everything in its path, just sandblasting everything, burying things. And it smelled horrible. It's like it was just death everywhere. So here's another shot of the same spot. So if we look at it, this is using a drone. The little arrow that's on the lower left of the photograph, that's that face of that square black rock that I was just showing you. And if you kind of look up the slope from that, and there's a big pile of logs and things, that's kind of where I was standing, taking the picture, looking out towards the ocean. So this is what it looked like in February of the 7th. And there's still, like when you look at it, there's still areas that have exposed boulders. It looks like there's tide pools. There's still some crustose coralline algae on the base of the rocks. It's like, okay, it doesn't look pristine, but it looks like it's still like an intertidal that has life on it. When we look at it just 2 weeks later, the arrows are in the exact same spots. The drone shot is not exactly the same shot. It's a little bit offset, but you can see the sand moved in and buried everything. All the barnacles on the rocks, all the anemones on the rocks, everything scoured, buried, dead, killed. And so wholesale, massive destruction. This is now a month after the rains had stopped and the debris flows had stopped. So there's this ongoing march of material heading south, killing everything in its path. So I'll just show you one more kind of example of burial. This is really close to the mouth of one of the creeks. And so there's this huge rock, and we would go there, and there was some little abalone stuck in some areas that we were trying to see if they were going to survive. So I want you to make a note of the two red lines. One red line's on the left, that's at the top of this kind of rock, and then there's another red line. And we would just walk into this stuff and kind of look for any abalone, see if there's anyone alive. So that's in February 8th. And then when we come back in May, those red lines are in the same spot. it's dropped about 6 feet in terms of the sediment. And what's happened is it's re-exposed what used to be there in terms of the geology, but almost all of the biology is gone. So you're back to a clean slate. And one of the things that I wish there'd been another graduate student who had been like, I'm going to look at intertidal succession after, a landslide and debris flows, because this was like a huge experiment happening to see who shows up first, what kinds of things, what kind of competitive interactions there are, et cetera. It would have been amazing, because nobody can do this kind of work if you tried to do like an experiment on this, like at this scale and across these kinds of habitats. But unfortunately, we didn't have enough time to kind of do that. So we were focused on this guy, the black abalone, which is a large mollusk, big snail. It's the second listed marine mollusk subtidal species. So the first one was the white abalone, which occurs in much deeper waters, almost extinct. And then this was listed as an endangered species in 2009. And I'm one of the biologists that's on the team that does the restoration plan. Because once something gets listed as an endangered species, biologists in the federal government have to work on a plan to try and get it off the list by making it not endangered anymore, right? Sounds like a good idea. So we've been working. Now, the bummer is we don't have any money. Nobody gives us money to kind of restore black abalone, but we do a lot of things kind of ad hoc and out of pocket, and we get a lot of support from the state and a lot of support from NGOs and other groups that help provide some funding to do some research. So this is one guy we called Ruffles. Some of the black abalone, we would go back to certain sites about every 2 weeks and look and see whether they were still there. And then we start to kind of get to know some of them. Black abalone in general, under normal circumstances, don't really move a ton. They're usually settle in places where algae, drift algae comes to them, kind of pizza delivered to them. They get to feed on it, they get to hang out, and they just need to be in a space that's safe from predators like sea otters in Central California and people. Well, this is what was happening to black abalone at Wendy's study sites. Was they were literally being buried alive. So that's not an abalone shell, that's a live black abalone that's partially buried. And we'd see that this is another live one. And so we would go around and basically dig up any of the guys that we saw, and then we would take them back to the lab. They were cared for about a month, and then they were released at another site in Big Sur that was not near all this sort of death and destruction, but had suitable habitat, either because there were existing black abalone there, or that we knew historically there had been black abalone there.
Dr.
So,
Lonhart,
yes,
I had a question.
yes, go ahead.
So, you've been showing us how the sand was, f coming from the rainfall and how it was burying everything alive.
Yeah,
But for the one previously with the two red lines, the sand disappeared. What
yes.
what happened at that site that made that sand go away?
Great question. So what happens is there was this initial deposition, right? There's all this stuff comes down during the rainy season, the rainy, those 36 hours plus probably another day or two after that. All the stuff comes down, and for the most part, it just clogs up where it hits the ocean and spreads a little bit. So then a lot of people might naively think, me included, okay, the stuff's there. Now there's just like a new beach. It's static. Nope. It's dynamic because of literal drift and the longshore current that's moving material along our along the coast of California that's generally moving north to south. We had material start moving in that north to south. And that's what I was talking about. Areas that hadn't been damaged 1, 2, 3 months later were getting damaged by material that was moving south. Well, the stuff that was near the mouth of the river eventually started to move south as well. So this conveyor belt is moving material both north and south, and tidal action is moving it on and offshore, and eventually it's moving offshore. So things don't tend to move uphill, they tend to move down the slope. So gradually, over the process of about a year, things had moved south until they kind of either settled and there wasn't really a slug of material, so to speak, that was moving en masse, and the material had been moving on and offshore. So it kind of came to a steady state of no more transportation to the south, and much of the material that had been at ground zero had moved upwards of a kilometer to the south. So that site, that rock that I said, oh, that was really close to one of the creek mouths, it had been buried, but then eventually, because no new material was coming in from the north, it cleaned out and it was sort of all migrating to the south. I mean, like the geologists, we had people from USGS, the Geological Survey came out. They were having like, they were like giddy. They were like kids. They're like, oh my God, this is so incredible. Look at the drift. And they had drones. And they set up all kinds of instruments. They've been doing structure for motion photography, doing drone flights. They were super, super geeking out on all the sort of kind of geological processes and the water motion and how the ocean was interacting with this material and moving around. And we're like, yeah, you know, all your cool rocks, they're killing all our biology. Like, yeah, we don't care about the biology. The rocks are cool.
Geologists.
Yeah, totally geologists, right? They're like, oh, you don't understand the physics of this. I'm like, you're correct, I don't. But I do understand the ecology of it. So anyways, it's really, it's always fun to kind of sit there and talk to them, because they're like, why does it smell so bad? It's like, everything's dead. Your rocks killed everything. But that's why that area cleared out. And unfortunately, now that it's, you know, over 4 years later, it's getting close to 5 years, many of the study sites that we were looking at were accessed through a private landowner. He actually had a road that we could hike down. It was about a 1.5-mile hike. And then sometimes we'd have a rope and rappel down the last kind of 15, 20 feet to get onto the beach. And he was really helpful like the first 3 years, and then was kind of like, hey, you're kind of done with your dissertation data collection, right? I don't want you guys traipsing around on my multi-million-dollar property anymore. So I haven't been back there in like 2 years, and I might try and ask Wendy if the guy will let me on just for a day to go down there during a low tide and just see how everything has changed or not, because I'd be fascinated to see how it has or hasn't recovered in certain areas.
So Steve, we're doing a coastal monitoring class in the spring. Maybe we could meet you there and with drones and do a little mapping when you're there.
Yeah, I could ask that. I'm guessing a gaggle of students, not as likely for this billionaire. Maybe one guy, but I could ask. That would be cool. There are places, though. Joking aside, there are other places that we went to that weren't private property, that once the road's back open, it'd be really cool to talk to you and see your students fly some drones and check some of the stuff out, because
Cool.
I think it would be really informative for people to see the aftermath and how things do or don't look normal, so to speak.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay. So here's Wendy taking a picture. There's an abalone in there. So I told you we collected lots, a couple hundred black abalone that basically were at high risk of dying, or we thought were going to be dead but didn't die. And then this is actually Wendy. That's Wendy on the left, and she's handing one of the abalone to Nate on the right. He's one of the UC Santa Cruz marine techs that does intertidal sampling as a career, not just working on this debris flow stuff, but he does sampling all up and down the U.S. West Coast for UC Santa Cruz and the multi-agency Rocky Intertidal Network. And so we went and we're putting all the abalone back out, and then we were trying to track them through time to see if they stayed there, if they moved around, if they survived, etc. And a lot of them had abalone bling. And so there was a lot of markings and things we put on them. Some of them were just, kind of colors so we could see them. Others were tags so we knew who it was. And fortunately or unfortunately, fortunately for the abalone, unfortunately for the scientists, those things all get worn off pretty quickly. So within a few months, some of them had lost like half of their tags, just because they're in a very high energy environment. They have a shell that's rubbing against other abalone, against rocks, against algae and things, and stuff just wears off and kind of disappears. Okay, that is the black abalone story. So are there any questions about the black abalone story before I switch into the last story?
Necessarily with the black abalone, but how long does it take for like a burn scar to recover so a big mass wasting event like that doesn't happen?
Yeah, good question. So the soil, so I ended up learning a lot about soil stuff. And so what happens is when you have a fire like that, it actually creates this sort of condition, this environment of the soil that makes it extremely susceptible to the rainfall for between 2 and 3 years. It actually changes the surface soil chemistry, and it makes it more prone to movement. So after about 3 years, it can still happen, but usually by then, the really weedy species that are fire adapted come in, and then there's some species that have a root burrow that'll be underground that survives. Again, it's a long-lived fire adapted species that will grow back kind of the aerial portion. The whole thing didn't die out, and then there's a lot of kind of herbaceous things that cruise in and sort of hold the fort down literally uh, for those initial years before more shrubs and kind of our typical Mediterranean chaparral species can kind of take root, grow bigger, and stabilize the soil. So that's why that area, everyone was kind of worried for, like, okay, we have a 2 to 3 year window. And it's like, oh, it was a 3 week window that like fire stopped, fully controlled and contained and over, and then atmospheric rivers. So some of the areas now, when you go back and look at them, they look like really heavily vegetated, typical post fire scar kind of scene where they're really hyper green, bright green, a lot of new vegetation, and obviously different from areas just a few kilometers away that never had been burned and have that kind of older, grayer, kind of drab green looking mature species. So, yeah. Any other questions about the abalone or the fires or any of that stuff before we move on? Good questions. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to the last part of the talk, which is this is essentially what I was supposed to give at WSN, a version of this, but I was during the shutdown, I wasn't allowed to go to work, and that would have been going to work. So I haven't missed WSN since, I don't know, like 19 whatever,
The Dark Ages. The
1998 or
Dark
something.
Ages.
Yeah, so that was a bummer. I had a good streak going. Anyways, and I heard Sean had a lot of you folks there, or other students, and I would have loved to have seen you guys. And it sounds like people who did go to WSN had a great time, and it is a fantastic meeting, student oriented, and those of you that continue on in science, especially marine science, but even coastal science, keep it in the back of your head as a place that you want to go give your first talk, because that's what I did, and it's a very welcoming place. So hopefully you guys felt that way.
Yeah, you guys should unmute and give Dr. Lonhart a quick. I think 26 of you were there, so give him a quick 15 feedback if you guys thought it was a.
Dr. A, I think you kind of cut out there.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, if you guys went to WSN, unmute for just a quick 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and let Dr. Lonhart know if you guys thought it was a good meeting. He's part of the organizational team for WSN.
I had a
Honestly,
good time.
yeah, I had a good time too. I that was like my first conference meeting, and honestly, everyone was so welcoming, and I really like how it felt like there wasn't a such thing as like a dumb question. In a way, like everyone was just very eager to just talk about their stuff, and I really saw the passion in everyone. So that was really great to see.
Excellent.
I thought it was very accessible and it was a fun conference to attend. A lot of the talks were really interesting and lots of cool people to meet and network with.
Some of us also
Ec-
had the opportunity to work with Dr. Anderson in making a poster and presenting a poster. So I thought that was really cool to have the opportunity to do that, and for that to be our first like poster session.
Yes, yes. A lot of the undergraduates um, giving posters, and even graduate students give posters. That's been a really good way to kind of dip your toe into it. You kind of, even though you have to stand there and people kind of walk by, you can have some wonderful conversations and you get to meet all the other students. So I'm glad you guys felt welcomed. It's a student oriented society. I was going when I was a grad student, and I've been going ever since. And it's a wonderful place to meet and, like someone said, to connect. There's a lot of other students. There's a lot of other faculty members. There's a lot of people from agencies, state and federal, and you get to kind of see a whole breadth of things in a very, in my opinion, relaxed environment. So I'm glad you guys, went. That's great. Okay, so I'm going to jump in here and talk about. Now we're going from the intertidal to the subtidal, and I'm going to talk about a really interesting kind of setup. So back in 2019, there were people up in Mendocino and Sonoma County that, because of the loss of bull kelp up there, there was a huge problem with red abalone, which are a recreationally important species up there. And they were like, hey, there's too many urchins. The urchin explosion that started kind of around 2014, 2015 had really exploded up in Sonoma and Mendocino counties, and they wanted to start smashing urchins and getting rid of urchins up there so that they could hopefully have kelp return. Well, there was a guy down in Monterey County who's like, well, hey, if those guys can smash urchins up there, I want to smash urchins here, because we don't have a lot of bull kelp, but we have a lot of giant kelp. And so he petitioned the California Fish and Game Commission to change the fishing regulations. So this wasn't a scientific permit. This was a change in the fishing regulations. Like when you go and say, hey, I want to go collect urchins and eat them because I like uni, you have to buy a sport fishing license from the state of California, and you're only allowed to collect so many per day. Well, this guy, the petitioner, wanted to change that and have an area which was called Tanker Reef in Monterey off of the Fort Ord area, and say, hey, can we kill as many purple and red urchins as we want and hopefully see if kelp will grow back? So the idea was, you can take here is basically killing as many as you want, but only by using a hand tool or like a hammer or something like that. You can dump chemicals or use a big vacuum or something. And so the Fish and Game Commission allowed that to happen, and it began with April 1st of 2021, and it would run for 3 years. And then unless they did something, the regulation would sunset, which means the regulation would stop existing and would go back to what it had been before they made this sort of amendment to the regulation. So where are we talking about? So there's the outline of Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. And if you zoom into the Monterey Peninsula, and down in the lower left, you see there's one of the wharf pilings. Off of the big sandy beach, what's called Del Monte Beach, is this reef. What I used to, when I was diving here, started diving back in 1988, it was called the shale beds because it's made out of shale. It's this sedimentary rock. Really, it's basically like the consistency of a really thick chocolate bar. Like on thin edges, you can snap it. It's just this really flimsy sedimentary rock, very, very flat. And it has all these kind of ledges and shelves, and some areas have kelp. So when you look here, anywhere you see red, that's this emergent shale reef. And then all the tan stuff is sand. And the green overlay shows you where kelp has existed at some point. Not all the time, but at some point. And so the 4 yellow dots indicate the area that we would call the grid, because we actually made a grid there. And we would do, or the petitioner with the people who had a valid sports fishing license would go and do smashing there. And then if you look over where the pink dot is, that's our control site. And we had just a bunch of control transects that we collected information there where they didn't do any urchin culling. So the grid, like I was saying, it's a super flat area. It's usually the visibility is not super great. It's oftentimes kind of murky. And we laid out these big lines, and we basically made a 100-meter by 100-meter square, so a hectare, with 10 10-meter wide lanes, A, B, C, D, all the way out to K. There's no I. The guy who set it up is like an engineer, and he's like, yeah, you can't put I. It looks like the Roman numeral 1. So it goes like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. It goes H, J, K. No I. And then they're 100 meters long, and then we have transects nested within them. So when you look at it, this is basically what it looks like. On the left is the restoration, so 100 meters by 100 meters, and you see the lane A, B, C, D going all the way to K. And then there's these transects, either 2 or 1, that were essentially randomly placed within those lanes for a total of 18 transects. And then we have a control site where that pink dot was about a kilometer and a half away, where no one's doing any smashing. And there's basically 3 transects in a row, 6 lanes, another 18. So what happened? The petitioner, and that's the guy right there, the guy with the mustache with the hammer, that's Keith. He's the one who petitioned the Fish and Game Commission to get it to change. And we would go out, or he would go out with his sport fishers, and they would just smash urchins. And they started in the grid and quickly finished doing the grid, and then started going kind of on the margins of the grid and kind of going outward, and would smash the urchins. So what did we do? So the scientists from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and from the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, we would go out and we would do transect surveys. So where you've got a 30-meter tape, and on 1 meter on either side, we would size 100 purple urchins, and then we would just count from that point onward. But we would size 100 of them, and any red urchin that we saw, we would size, because we never got to 100. And then we would count all the urchins for the rest of the 30 meters. And then we would look at all the kelp that existed there. And we would differentiate between adult kelp, juvenile kelp, and new little recruit kelp. And I said already, we had 18 replicates in the grid where the people were doing the smashing. And then we had 18 replicates in the control area. And then here's just a little timeline. So we collected data right before, so the yellow dots indicate when we collected data. And the dark dots on the upper row indicate when it was allowed for these people to smash urchins. And so every year we did about 3 or 4 sampling periods of collecting data in the grid and at the control site. And then the arrow shows that right before about 7 months before it was supposed to end, they stopped working in the grid because there's all kinds of misinterpretations about things and some conflicts and just people things, and so they stopped calling. So we actually started seeing a cessation of calling before it was scheduled to stop. So now I'm going to show you the data, and basically there's 3 kinds of data. There's red urchins, purple urchins, and giant kelp. So I'm just going to show you those 3 species, starting off with purple urchins. So there's purple urchins. So it's really important, this y-axis is only going up to a half of an urchin per square meter. So red urchins were not super abundant at this site. They were actually pretty rare. But even so, there were differences between when we started, which is the very first data point. So it says spring of 2021, pre-culling, before they started smashing. So that's what this sort of state of the system was. And then from fall 2021 onward, there was culling that was in the solid line with the circles. So that's the line at the bottom. And the dashed line above is the control site where culling, smashing urchins was not occurring. So you can see, in fact, in both cases, it was like, why is it declining at the control area? We're not really doing anything there. So we don't know what was going on there. But it kind of mimicked, to a large extent, what was happening at the restoration site was mimicking what was happening at the control site. The reality is they never really smashed many of the red urchins, so there wasn't really a huge effect because they were so rare to start off with. And when you did see them, they were way back in a ledge and very hard to access, so someone couldn't get their arm back there with a hammer and smash them. So unexciting information there, okay? When we switch down to purples, that's where the real story is. So now notice the y-axis isn't going up to a half an urchin, it's going up to 10 urchins per square meter. And if you look at the spring of 2021, before anything started happening, the control site was at about 8.5 urchins per square meter, and the restoration site, the circles with the solid line, was at about 6.5 urchins per square meter. And then notice, massive drop within 4 months. There's this huge decline in the number of urchins seen. That's at the restoration grid. And that dashed line, the gray dashed line, that's at 2 urchins per square meter, is the threshold that was targeted to get the density of purple urchins below. That was thought to be, based on the literature, the number of urchins per square meter, that if you had 2 per square meter, kelp, if it showed up, if it recruited naturally, would be able to grow. And they were below that for a year. And then it kind of popped up a little bit and they got it back down again. But then they stopped, like I said, in July of 23, and the numbers you see started to shoot back up. Whereas the control area, they dropped a little bit, but then they just kind of bounced around. We're very up and down, kind of following some seasonal patterns, or who knows, sampling bias. I don't know. So that's the number of urchins. Now I'm going to show you the size of the urchins. So this is the diameter of the urchins, and we measure them to the nearest centimeter. So they're like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, upwards of 6 centimeters in diameter. So here, the axis is showing that the average was close to about 3.8 centimeters at the grid where the smashing happened, and then immediately dropped down. Why did it drop down? Well, it dropped down because people who have a hammer and are looking for something to smash see big urchins first. And the purple urchins were out all over the place. So it was really easy to smash big purple urchins first. So that caused the mean size of the urchins to drop pretty dramatically. And then it kind of hung around. And then starting in the spring and summer, it was creeping up a little bit. And then there was this interesting thing. Remember, I told you in July of 2023, they stopped smashing in the grid, but the size goes down. Okay, I'm going to pause right here and ask people, why do you think the size, the average size of purple urchins dropped, even though they weren't smashing the urchins anymore? Who can tell me why that happened? Anybody? Have a guess.
Could they have adapted to try to hide themselves better from
Well,
Smash?
that's a very good point. They were definitely hiding when the numbers were reduced because that's their natural behavior. Urchins tend to hide because they're usually, when they're well fed, they are delicious morsels for sea otters. But it wasn't being driven by a behavioral change. There was, however, another change that happened in that winter and especially the spring. We were seeing what if you're not getting rid of the biggest urchins to drive down the size, okay, that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is you're doing what to the smallest urchins? Are the smallest urchins increasing in number or decreasing in number, which is driving the mean size down? You have a
The
50-50
smaller
chance.
ones,
Are they
the smaller ones
increasing?
get take or the bigger ones get taken out, so the smaller ones live on.
Yeah,
Is that
that's
why they're
true. But what I'm telling you right now is they weren't smashing big guys anymore, but the size kept going down. So you're kind of like, wait a second. It'd be like if you were in a room and you said, well, the room is full of people. The old people stopped dying, but our mean age keeps going down.
Very white.
How?
Very white.
Our age keeps going down because there are more babies, right?
And
When you average in all the new small urchins, it drives the mean size down because there's so many of them. So the average age in a room can drop, not because the old people die, because you throw 100 babies in there and they're all 3 months old. The mean age drops. It gets younger because you have so many young babies. That's exactly what was happening with the urchins. Was we were getting massive recruitment and we were getting lots of 1 and 2 centimeter urchins that were driving it down. So we have two mechanisms here for why the urchin sizes dropped. One was because initially hammers are smashing big urchins, only the small guys are left. Then they kind of growing up a little bit year by year, and then all of a sudden huge drop because we got a massive pulse of recruitment, lots of very small urchins. So that's another reason why you can get a drop in the size. So that was just kind of an interesting thing, like, holy smokes, where are all these little guys coming in? Well, they were all coming in because there was lots of reproduction. Why was there reproduction? There was reproduction because there was kelp. So remember, I told you initially that number of urchins in the grid where they were smashing went way down, which means what showed up and survived? You got it, giant kelp. So when you look at the spring and summer of 2022, whoosh, the number of giant kelp individuals, so that not counting any of the steps, just saying a whole thallus, the whole body of a kelp, was tripling, and in some cases from the beginning, from the beforehand, it was like a 15-fold increase. It was massive, and then it kind of dropped down and kind of petered around a new higher level of kelp. In the same time, if you look over at the control area, the triangles with the little dash line, not much is happening. We rarely ever saw any kelp over there, and if it showed up, it got gobbled up really fast. Okay. Now, if you look at, instead of counting a kelp as an individual, but now count the individual stipe. So a giant kelp, isn't just one sort of trunk. it has many what are called stipes, or you can think of like a sort of a trunk. And so if you count those, it's a real difference between finding an individual giant kelp that has 2 stipes, that's a really young kind of wimpy guy, versus like what this diver's counting there, which probably has about 30 or 40 stipes. That's a mature individual that's probably been there for 2 years, is doing great, goes all the way up to the surface, makes a canopy, birds are crawling on top of the blades, etc., providing habitat for fishes, etc. So we really see this difference in the stipes when you look over time, that they increased. Basically, a kelp forest came back because the people with hammers reduced the urchins to a low enough density that the kelp could survive, it could thrive, and it generates drift kelp, okay? Some blades get old and fall off. Sometimes there's a storm and stuff gets ripped up and torn a little bit. That drift kelp is what goes towards the urchins. They grab it, and that's what they feed on. If they can stay in a crack and be protected with their sharp spines and use their tube feet to grab onto drift kelp, they will happily do that for their entire lives, because that is the safest, most anti-predator friendly behavior they can have. And that's what they were doing for a long time. Okay, now look at the baby kelp. That's a little giant. That's a picture of a little baby giant Macrocystis pyrifera. Again, notice the massive jump up in the spring, and then the crazy. So this is, for you guys won't think this is crazy, but for somebody who's been diving in kelp forests for almost, 35 plus years, seeing young kelp at weird times of the year is mind-blowing. Little baby kelp are supposed to show up late winter, early spring, like clockwork. They grow up, and that is the way it's supposed to be. And that's not the way it was happening out there. That's why we started diving in weird times of the year, like in December, in January, because I said, we got to go out there, because I think this recruitment is happening year round now, that these kelp aren't following a seasonal cycle, that they're off cycle. And sure enough, we were finding juveniles at all times of the year. And all the ecologists, everybody who's been diving in Monterey was like, this is so weird. What is going on? And it's just sort of like reproduction's happening. There's space available, and the kelp is showing up. And it's just been really crazy. Even, and you'll notice on this figure, when you look at the last 2 data points, even at the control site, we started to see a few individuals of juvenile kelp that were surviving. So I'm going to summarize all this stuff. So these volunteer divers, people with a sport fishing license, were able to reduce purple urchin densities within a few months very rapidly, and it got it underneath the threshold. Kelp responded, initially shooting through the roof, then kind of dropping down to a stable density for multiple years. Juvenile kelp increased, but then also kind of equilibrated. And we've seen these giant kelp juveniles and recruits year round. Really bizarro, not normal at all. At the control site, urchins remain, for the most part, pretty stable. Didn't see much kelp. The only times we did see kelp was at the very farthest end, the last transects closest to our shallowest part, where the wave action in the sand was the highest, and the urchins probably have the hardest time making a living because of the wave action and the sand. So what are we going to do? We're going to keep monitoring. The hammers were legally stopped in April of 2024. He's been trying to restart it, but with no luck. The Fish and Game commissioners are kind of done with it. Say, look, it could happen, but we can't ramp this up to be really large scale because it's a fishing regulation. They don't want to mess with the fishing regulations. We've had reports going to the Fish and Game Commission, so they know that. And then we've got a couple of manuscripts that are in the work that we'll hopefully get out sometime in the near future. So that is what's happening at Tanker Reef. And there's a ton of people that were involved with it. And at this point, I will pause and see if you guys have any questions about that part or any more questions.
So how
'Cause
come
yeah,
you mentioned that the regulation would sunset, so it would end at that point, but how
yes,
come the service did not see the evidence that you presented and that it's successful
yes.
in promoting it?
Excellent question. So basically, it was clear that this worked in terms of getting purple urchin densities down. So in terms of like, if you consider this a demonstration project, like could a petitioner manage private citizens who go buy a fishing license, organize them, direct their efforts, and demonstrate that they can reduce urchins, kelp shows up, and a kelp forest grows? Success in all cases. That all happened. So there was no need to keep doing it, right? That was like, it's a 3-year project. The real question in my mind, like after that, so like, check, 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 that all worked. Now, most people would say, okay, so you had upwards of 300 volunteers spend several hundred hours, their own money, you had donations, all this stuff. You got it down. How long does it last, and how often do you have to do this? Is this something you have to do for the rest of your life? Is this
Mm.
something you can do once a year? Is this something you can do every 6 months? What is it? So when it's sunset, the idea was, let's see how long it persists. Because what happens if you stop the hammers and everything goes right back to where it was beforehand? All urchins, no kelp. Well, that would be
Mm.
horrible. But that's not what happened. And my talk at WSN this year was, basically, when the hammers stop, what happens? And so we've been monitoring this site, looking at how long does the kelp persist? Because believe me, if you went to a management agency and said, hey, we can restore your kelp forest there on that little stretch of, coastline, that's 500 meters long, we can do that, but we need 100 people diving 3 times a month, every month, every year. Can you support us in that? And the agency's going to be like, no, we can barely support the people who work here. We can't support that. Versus, hey, I need 10 people every 6 months to go out, and we can do the same thing, and the kelp's going to last. The agency might go, oh, 10 people once every 6 months? I think we might be able to support that. We might be able to give you some boat time. We might be able to throw a couple of our divers in and help you out. Hugely different. And so that second aspect of what happens when the hammer stops was never part of what the petitioner wanted to do. And he, to his credit, he built up this incredible kind of cottage industry around all this. He ended up retiring from his job. He's an engineer, and he basically like, I'm going to do kelp restoration full time. But he has to find a different kind of business model, because this is not what the Fish and Game Commission was sort of signing up for. As a proof of concept proven. Now what we're finding out is that you could probably do it with not as much consistent work and still get that benefit. So that's the part that we're gonna, in the manuscript, that this guy's going to be a co-author on. We haven't given him the cold shoulder. He was upset that he didn't get his way, but it's like, hey, we're working with this guy, and we want to make sure that what we found gets distributed to people so they can understand, at least at Tanker Reef in Monterey Bay in Central California, this is how it worked and this is what you could do with it. So good question.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions on that stuff? I just have 3 shots of Dr. A before we finish to show you just a hint of Sean in his younger days. You guys ready for it? All right, so here's a shot when Sean was when he was doing a postdoc up at Stanford, and
Wow.
so I don't know, yeah, 2004. Look at that. And so this is at WSN, one of our meetings. And so you guys know one of the highlights of the meeting used to be we would all have during the banquet, before Sean had 26 students with him, we would all gather together, the guys, those of us who were just finishing grad school or trying to find a job and all this other stuff, and we would sit around and commiserate and chit chat, and we had some really funny conversations during those dinners, most of which I fortunately can't remember,
or should not remember,
or should not. I was going to say, protect the innocent. Here's another one. This is literally one of my favorite shirts. So Sean was, as you guys probably know, he was really ahead of his time in terms of fashion and fashion statements. And so he always had some awesome shirts, and WSN is known for people having great shirts. And this one was, "I'm no rocket surgeon." So the old, rocket scientist, brain surgeon. This was a mishmash of it, and I was just cracking up on that. Is hilarious. And this is also at WSN. And
I was considerably heavier then as well.
Well, we all go through these cycles. There's phases, the waxing. And then this is one where he was part of the frizzy wig mafioso, running around. There were a bunch of guys wearing these wigs, and you guys probably don't know, or probably Sean may or may not have shared with you, but for many years, Sean was key and instrumental in raising money for the students, which went towards student travel and to support students coming to the conference. And so one of the things that used to happen at WSN was a very boisterous post-banquet auction. And the auctioneers, their job was to really generate enthusiasm and get people to open up their wallet books. And it's always, they say, it's for the students. And so Sean literally by himself and with Mark Steele and with others has raised thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars for students and student travel to WSN. And so times change, things change, whatever, but those will be some of my precious memories of Sean with glass in hand, running around, sweating, usually in costume, usually very elaborate costumes, or at least sweaty costumes, and headwear. He always had interesting headwear on, and running around getting people to donate money and buy things, usually way over the price that was required, but again, to the benefit of the students. So anyways, and with that, if there are any other questions, I will happily take them, but we're at 5 minutes till 7, and I'm sure people want to go and not listen to me anymore. So thank you very much for your attention.
I'm just curious,
let me know.
that last picture, what was Dr. A dressed as, and like what the blue thing? Yeah, what was that?
That was Perry the platypus.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. I have other pictures, but I can't show them.
Well, you guys can ask questions, but that was awesome. Let's thank Dr. Lonhart. That was awesome. You guys unmute and give a nice round of applause to the young man. Excellent.
I'll stop sharing so maybe I can see you guys. Now I can see people.
Yeah, excellent.
Oh, there we go. Let me go to gallery view. Oh, look at all your happy faces. Right on. Well, nice virtually meeting you guys. Thanks for hanging in there. You guys are very fortunate to have such a great, and it's not just because he's my buddy, but Sean is a real educator. I'm sure you guys recognize that. He's about students, he's about opportunities, he's about giving you guys a chance to see some and do some cool stuff. And you're not going to really fully appreciate it till you're like 40 years old. So I'm just telling you now, you'll be like, Steve was right. I should go write that guy a message. Now that I'm an executive somewhere, or I'm a biologist somewhere, you guys should there's not a lot of people who take the time to involve students in doing stuff. So, and good on all of you as students for taking advantage of it. That's one of the things that I always tell people. They're like, what's the piece of advice? I say, try things you do and you don't like, because as important as it's to know what you do like, I think it's even more important to know what you don't like, because you don't want to get stuck in a job doing something you don't like. My brother got a degree in chemical engineering, UC Davis, went to the lab for 6 months, like, I hate this. I'm going to go back to swinging a hammer, being a contractor that paid for my schooling, because I don't like being in a white lab coat. And I was like, dude, you spent all this time. You're a chemical engineer. What the heck? So try lots of things out. That's my piece of advice.
Awesome. Questions for Dr. Lonhart? Anybody wonder anything else besides how many energy drinks I drink?
Have you done any like specific work in and around the Davidson seamount, or is that kind of outside of the purview?
Yeah, the Davis. So one of my coworkers, like, he's the guy who actually helped discover the octopus garden. So Chad King, he's been on CNN, he's been on Nat Geo and stuff. I don't go on white ships. So like everyone has to kind of pick your thing. I scuba dive and I crawl around the intertidal and I trudge in the mud of an estuary. But going on the white ship, the big 200, 250 foot NOAA vessels, I did that in grad school and I got horribly seasick. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to stick to scuba diving and being closer to shore. But the people who go out to Davidson Seamount, this last cruise they went out on was phenomenal. They saw all kinds of whales out there. They saw all kinds of birds. They saw blue whales. They said it was just fantastic. Now they had these amazing conditions, but every time they go out there, whether they're people doing the shipboard stuff, like looking at the marine mammals and birds, whether it's the tows that are doing the plankton tows, or sending the ROVs down to look at the seamount itself, they're discovering literally new things. And it's like right here in our backyard. It's not far. So it's a very cool place.
Thank you.
Yeah. I if people want to check out, like I said, either the main Monterey, the government website, or that Simon website, there's all kinds of really cool stuff on there. And we have some stuff on Davidson Seamount there there's movies, there's all kinds of stuff about Davidson Seamount.
Steve, I don't want you to be controversial or whatever, but maybe you could give us an update as to the current goings on of the sanctuary with the current federal goings on.
Yeah. So most of so we were shut down as part of the government shutdown. We're in the Department of Commerce. So I was furloughed during that whole time. There were some people in our office who worked intermittently because they had to respond to vessel groundings, spills, stuff that happens that affect our resources. So they have to kind of keep working, and did it intermittently. Sanctuaries as a program have shrunk. So all those 18 sites I showed you that were all throughout the US, from American Samoa up to Stellwagen Bank and stuff in the Chesapeake, there used to be about 175 federal employees and about a $55 million budget for all 18 of those sites, the buildings, the federal staff, and then contractors. We had another like 50 contractors. Out of those 175, when Elon Musk kind of came in and said, hey, you can take the fork in the road, you can do this kind of early, we'll pay you for the whole rest of the year, but you got to go. And then they had an early retirement offer. About 35 out of those 175 people took that and are gone, and they have not been replaced. So we went from 175 to about 140. Our contractors are barely hanging on. Some of the contracts are not being renewed. So we're going to lose more contractors in the coming year because their contracts were already kind of going through this year and into a little bit of next year when all this craziness started happening. So we're shrinking, and we're still waiting for what's called a reduction in force, which is basically reducing the number of people who are working. And we don't know if that's going to happen. So I don't know if I'm going to lose my job. And I've been working here since 2002, and they could just be like, yeah, you're out of here. So what used to be thought of like when you worked for the government as like a stable, you're not going to make a lot of money, but you're going to have a stable job, you're going to have healthcare benefits, and you're going to have a little bit of a retirement. It's kind of like a teacher. You know, a teacher, you're not going to make a ton of money, but you're going to be able to make money when you're retired from your service, time spent, and you get some healthcare benefits, etc. That was what like our promise was, and that's really being threatened right now. And so it's very civil service. I would have said 3-4 years ago, a great option in terms of stability and life choice, lifestyle. Like, a lot of times I go home and I don't have to worry about grading papers. I don't have to worry about writing the next lecture. I don't have to worry about a student thesis. I mean, I still do some, thesis committees, but it's the ones I pick, I don't have to do care and feeding of a classroom for 15 weeks. So those are things that are different between like an academic position or a commercial position and a government position. And a lot of that is being changed now, and it's being changed in ways that nobody really anticipated, and we still don't know where it's going to go. So it's a lot of it's a mystery. We're all finding out about many of these weird mysteries we never thought we were gonna have, but that's.
And I would just add, if you guys recall from our surveys this year, we asked people about are they supportive or not supportive of those various management actions. Establishment of Channel Islands National Park, establishment of protected areas, those are consistently the most supported, the most positive across the board. Just about everybody thinks that, yes, creating protected areas is a good thing. And so if this is happening to our management efforts that the vast majority of people are very supportive of and say they're some of the best things we've done in the coastal zone, you can imagine what's happening to some of those other management units and things that are less supported or less popular. So this is something that is maybe a little hard sometimes to pay attention to with all the other chaos we have in our lives and stuff, but you really do need to keep following the ball on this. Otherwise, we might really end up in an even worse place in terms of how we prioritize these important functions that are our shared heritage here.
Yeah. And it's a tough one because in the sanctuary, we have different areas. One area that I'm in is the research area. We have a resource protection area, like I was talking about, when there's a boat grounding or an oil spill or something, the people that kind of come and make sure that the resources are protected. We have a whole education and outreach group where we have school kids coming to our visitor centers, learning about the ocean. We have K through 12 programs that they go to schools and bring stuff to them. That stuff is all being threatened right now. And a lot of people don't know about it because it's for kids. Like the kids kind of know about it and they have fun, but maybe even the parents don't know. It's like, oh, I have to sign up. You're on a field trip. Good. Have fun. I don't know where you're going. Oh, you're going on a field trip to the Sanctuary Exploration Center. You're going to get to drive a little ROV in a tank. You're going to get to see a cool movie. You get to do hands-on stuff and use a microscope. These are all things that unfortunately don't get a lot of attention, but those are the kinds of things, particularly to communities that don't have access and don't have the opportunity to do that stuff. And this is all provided free. You know, I mean, the taxpayers ultimately pay for it, but it's a free service given back to the public. And I think it pays dividends, but it's not until someone, you know, maybe some of you guys even went to a local museum or something, were like, oh, I like this stuff. You know, biology is cool, or environmental science is cool. You know, or you just live in an area where you're like, I want to learn more about how the world works because this is really neat stuff and it intrigues me. And we try and do that with a lot of communities that do not go to the ocean because they're neither agricultural communities inland, they're too far away. And so we help get buses to the centers, or we bring teachers and materials to the classrooms in those areas to get those children to have a little spark and enjoy stuff. So okay, anything else?
Awesome. I'm gonna say thanks, Dr. Lonhart. I'm gonna pause it, but if you guys have more questions, I'm just gonna kill our recording here for a second after saying thank you to the wonderful Dr. Lonhart. Another fantastic talk. Love it, love it, love it.